Hi, hey, today's objective is to figure out how to pass the ICC Fire Inspector 1 and Fire Inspector 2 exams. The references for those are the International Building Code, the International Fire Code, and the Fire Inspector and Code Enforcement by IFSTA. IFSTA comes out of Oklahoma State University. I want to go through, I took this several years ago, but I made a quiz in an online tutorial that makes it very easy to go through and pass this test if the steps in the tutorial are followed. Fire Inspector 1 is basically a lead into Fire Inspector 2, but I'll be honest with you, if you've studied well and prepared for Fire Inspector 2, you probably should take both together. Now, we've put together a series of exams to help prep people so they can pass the Fire Inspector 1 and Fire Inspector 2. We did this several years ago. It was based on the 2015 editions of the IFC, IBC, and also an earlier edition of the Fire Inspection and Code Enforcement book from IFSTA. The substance hasn't changed. If you pass in 2015, there are very small, minor deviances between the 2021 or 2024 and 2015. One specific one is IFC Chapter 12, specifically for electrical storage systems. There's a few minor things in there relative to fire barriers, separating certain thresholds of battery reserves like 20 kilowatt hour or 70 kilowatt hour. You have a 1 hour rating or 2 hour rating barrier. There's a table you can follow that shows that. It's very straightforward. But otherwise, everything is going to be consistent between the earlier versions of the ICC tests and today's version. So I want to show you that prep test. It makes it very easy. If you come over here to this particular website, catchsunlight.com QFPE, I set this up to train fire protection engineers. And as part of that, I saw a weakness, wanted to develop something so we can internally provide resources to personnel to make sure that they were able to pass the FI1 and FI2, Fire Inspector 1 and Fire Inspector 2. This series of questions, these are in 10 question snippets, makes it very easy, and it automatically grades so you can get your score very quickly. You can do multiple iterations of this without a problem, and if you hover over the hint, it actually tells you the table or the reference you need to go to. The one thing on this I want to point out that we did here is this is for IFC. I did not include IBC in this. The IBC, the section of IBC that you're going to look for the FI1 and FI2, it's just Chapter 4. Chapter 4 of the IBC, all that does is cover unique situations like high-rises, amusement parks. For instance, a very common question you're almost always going to be asked for tests like this is in an amusement park when you have things like spook alleys, things like that, how high off the floor can you place your exit signage? You still have to have exit signage, but you're allowed to have them within 8 inches. So that's one of the things within Chapter 4, amusement parks specifically. Some other things you're going to find, like I said, high rises, but as you go through this, there's just underground homes or buildings, I should say, organic coatings, drying rooms. There's a variety of stuff you're going to see that's kind of unique for unique buildings, like high hazard buildings. Section 415, H1, H2, H3, H4, and H5. So the reality is for Fire Inspector 1 and Fire Inspector 2, almost all the questions are coming out of IFC, the International Fire Code. And as stated before, the 2015 IFC is really going to be just about the same as the 2024 IFC, except for Chapter 12. One thing I noticed too, I prepped, when I did this prep, I went through this book, prepped for it. I didn't need it. And I know it gives it as a reference. The reality in this, Fire Inspector 1 and Fire Inspector 2, you really don't need the IFSTA stuff on that, the Fire Inspector and Code Enforcement. I will tell you though, if you ever take, for your Certified Fire Marshal, CFM, when you have fire codes and standards, in that book, that standard, that test, you do need your IFSTA books, and that's a little bit different than this one, but for Fire Inspector 1 and Fire Inspector 2, you can pass just fine with the IFC and with Chapter 4 of the International Building Code. It's not a problem. So let's go into this training, explain how this works. So what you do to participate in this particular training here is each of these quizzes, there's 32 of these quizzes, there's 10 questions each. So 320 questions have been developed for this purpose. You really should go through them 4 times. If you go through 4 times, you'll be able to address the questions on the test. The principle here is to learn the layout, but I'll give you a secret. The questions you're going to see in the test come from a superset ICC maintains, and these questions capture that superset. So literally, there's about 75% of the questions you're going to see on the ICC exam are directly a subset of these 320 questions. So if you go through this, not only do you learn the questions, but you'll learn the layout of the International Fire Code. And that will help you pass the overall ICC Fire Inspector 1 and Fire Inspector 2 tests. So let's go in. Let's just take a look at this really quick. If I look at this setup here, quiz 1, the purpose of the fire code is to establish the blank requirements for providing a blank level of life safety and property protection. That is a very common question you're going to get when you take ICC related fire protection questions, such as Fire Plans Examiner, Fire Codes and Standards, or Fire Inspector 1 and Fire Inspector 2. You will see this question. So, I mean, the answer is minimum and reasonable. That comes right out of Chapter 1. Once again, the hint, Section 101.3. The intent here is to go through this entire list of questions and then go ahead and mark on your, in the code book, the specific item, the hint, or the reference, I should say, that you're going to encounter. So that was 103.3, let's see, 101.3. 101.3. I think there's some good value to actually go through the code book and actually see these highlights so you can understand a few things. I think there's some benefit in taking a look at my highlights. These highlights actually, many of these highlights anyway, actually came from the test. Went back and created this after taking it. So construction and design provisions, the construction and design provisions of this code shall apply to existing structures, facility, and conditions that, in the opinion of the fire code official, constitute a distinct hazard to life and property. This piece here is repeated. This is a repeated theme you're going to see throughout many of your examinations. So, change or use of occupancy subject to the approval of fire code official. So in the IFC, it references the fire code official. So anytime it says approved, what that means is fire code official. In the International Building Code, it's building code official. Now there's a lot of overlap. The IBC gives the building code official the same authority as the fire code official. It all depends on your application, municipality, whose opinion trumps whose. But in any event, fire code official is what they're going to reference when they ask you what does approved mean. It means approved by the fire code official. Conflicts. Will conflicts occur between provisions of this code and other standards, often referenced from this in Chapter 80? You're going to use the provisions of this code. So I'm just going to go through this with you. Let's just take a look at some of the stuff to understand it, see what we can come up with. Department of Fire Prevention. Let's see here. So I'm not going to go through all this. The jurisdiction is obligated to defend you. That might be a question that comes up. They have to cover that if you do something that causes somebody to sue you. Let's see. Fire code official. Yeah, it just gives you authority. Now, the one thing the fire code official, this is a question that will come up. The fire code official will be a list of things. What can the fire code official do? Or I should say, what can the fire official not do? And it'll say interpret the code. You definitely can do that. Enforce the code, yes. Inspect the code. It'll give you the option of waiving the requirements of the code. Now, there are certain situations where you can waive sections, such as construction documents. You're given authority to do that. But what needs to be taken away from this discussion is the fire code official cannot waive the code arbitrarily. You can't do that. That's actually a question that will come up. Official records is 5 years. So if you're setting up, let's say, a fire protection program within your company or something like that, And you got to ask yourself, how long do you maintain your inspection reports? Well, it's 5 years. And there's some latitude here. I mean, for instance, if you're talking about records, what does that mean? Does it mean hot work permits? There has to be some HJ discretion there, but just remember 5 years is the magic number. So you have to keep a record of each inspection you make. Does it mean 5 years? This is one thing that came up once, and I did talk to the Idaho State Fire Marshal's office about this to get their interpretation. So if you're doing an inspection, yeah, if you're calling it an inspection, great. You have to keep it, official records, 5 years. But how, let's say you have a periodicity where you're trying to identify excessive combustible storage on a periodic basis, like monthly or quarterly. Do you really need to maintain those for 5 years? Just call it by something else. You don't need to call it an inspection, fire inspection necessarily. Call it, just a follow-up or something like that. Not everything needs to be maintained, especially if you're supporting like a manufacturing facility or Department of Energy site, something like that. So modifications, the fire code official can make modifications, but they cannot lessen the health of the requirements. It can impact safety. You have authority to investigate fires. Basically, I'll tell you what, this is what you need to do. Go through, highlight everything I have highlighted as we go through, and especially relative to what we have in the tutorials. It'll help you succeed. Expirations, both the IBC and the IFC list 180 days. If you've not started work within 180 days, or if you pause for 180 days, your permit's void. You got to reapply for the permit. That's actually come up several times in my career. Now, here's the deal. Some municipalities require a registered design professional. So the question will ask, where required by the statutes of the jurisdiction? And keep in mind, the fire code official can always make things more challenging, but he's also bound. If you go to a board of appeals and he's just arbitrarily making you get a professional engineering stamp, you can push back. But if the jurisdiction has adopted that policy, a lot of cities have, in fact, then you're obligated to do that. So 105.6 deals with operational permits. This is really important. Now, you've probably heard of NFP 704 diamonds. We'll get there when we look at section 50 or chapter 57, but operational permits have permit level quantities, and that's a key element. If you're ever asked, well, what's the let's say some jurisdiction has some overzealous fire inspector. That person comes in and says, hey, you have a bottle of oxygen there. Let's say you have a little shop or something like that. Well, you don't need an NFPA 704 diamond or an operational permit if you're under the values shown, like 504 cubic feet at standard pressure and temperature. So that's how this works. 105.6 is really an important section to know. It goes through a variety of stuff. You need an operational permit for carnivals and fairs, cryogenic fluids if you're above something inert more than storage 500 gallons outside. Now that's a little bit different than propane. You're always going to need a permit for commercial applications outside of buildings above 60 gallons. Let's just keep that in mind. So let's just run through this. Believe it or not, what if you open a shop doing some cutting and welding? Let's say you're manufacturing trailers in your garage type thing. If it's a commercial entity, your municipality has the right to require a permit. Now, a lot of that goes under the radar, but keep that in mind. So I'm just going to jump through this. This gives you permit amounts for various hazardous substances. There's other sections in the code that allow you to have the maximum allowable quantities within a building. This is not what this is. All this is do you need a permit or not? If you're under these values in terms of volume, quantity, then you're fine. High piled storage is defined as above 12 feet. If you exceed 500 square feet, you need a permit. Lumber yards, assembly buildings, if you want to have like a car set up in a mall or something like that, this tells you how to do that, what the requirement is for a permit. So just run through this. I'm not going to read it all. It would take me 10 hours to go through the IFC. Got to make this quick. Let's see. check with Chapter 12, the 2024. This is lead acid batteries from 2015. 50 gallons is the magic number. If you have more than 50 gallons of electrolyte, you're going to have a permit. Big battery storage area. But now it's based on kilowatt hours for lithium, and it's like 20 kilowatt hours. There's some variation there, but check in Chapter 12 down the road. You can see that. This goes through some inspections, record keeping, and what I'm pointing to, the highlighted pieces are the important things you should know for your test. Let's see here. Board of Appeals. Fire code official cannot be a voting member of the Board of Appeals. Keep that in mind. You can always go to a Board of Appeals if you believe the fire code official is not exercising the appropriate authority. So don't be caught up. So let's say malicious prosecution. Let's say you have a fire code official that's constantly berating you but leaving somebody else without any kind of problems. You go to the Board of Appeals and take care of that. It's not just for misinterpretations. Just if you have a stop work order, just got to fix it, that kind of thing. But go through this, read these highlighted sections. That's what you need to do. Just basically know the layout of the code. You don't even need to necessarily memorize it. It will really help you if you do go through and memorize the 320 questions we've created. But in general, just know the layout of the code. Chapter 2, definitions. If you have something that is italicized within the code, it means it's defined within Chapter 2. Now, that's not across the board. Sometimes they fail to italicize it. But in any event, even if something isn't in Chapter 2, go to the Merriam-Webster's dictionary because that's what they use for the common interpretation. You do need to know flammable and combustible liquid definitions. That will be something you'll be asked. For instance, what's a Class 2 liquid? Diesel is an example of a Class 2. So typically the flash point's on the order of like 125 degrees Fahrenheit. So it defines it flash point between 100 and 140. I'm giving that as an example. Just go ahead and look those up. Let's see. So container. Yeah, keep in mind they use containers, tanks, things like that. Containers are designed at 60 gallons or less. Tanks, I think, are 660 gallons or less. We'll get to that. But the point is, don't be duped when you're going through the code and get caught up on these common verbiages. They actually have specific operational definitions. So look for any italicized area. Control area, that's also something that'll come up. You can go to Chapter 50 and have that better understood. Basically 1 or 2 hour fire barrier depending on what floor you're on and what the quantity is. Let's see, exit passageway. Don't get duped by this either. Once again, this is a specific definition. So you have 3 pieces of the means of egress. You have exit access, exit, and exit discharge. Exit passageway is kind of unique. It's an exit. It is an exit. Once you're in an exit passageway, you're protected by 1 hour fire-rated construction, and it's a protected path of egress travel. There are specific rules for exit passageways that you have to abide by. Expanded plastic, this is important to know too. This is foam. Chapter 26 of the IBC is going to cover specific requirements for that. So you will need to know what expanded foam is. You'll need to know the definition. That's actually a question on the test. So basically, everything I've highlighted is really stuff I've dealt with at one time or another on tests. Some of them I've just highlighted as part of my career, but most of them are through ICC testing. I've also taken some prep courses, so it's helped me there. High-piled combustible storage. Keep in mind, magic number is 12 feet. That's the magic number you need to know. What is high-piled storage? It's 12 feet high. They'll talk to you about that. Let's see. Means of egress. Like I said, means of egress, there's 3 members, exit access, exit, and exit discharge. That question may come up. occupancy classification. This is going to be really important for you to know. Everything like in Chapter 9, when we get to fire protection features, it's all based upon your occupancy type. So understand like a B occupancy is a business occupancy, assembly occupancy. There's different types of assemblies as well. So there's 5, like your outdoor arenas or fixed seating or your taverns, that kind of thing. They give you what they are. So you'll be asked, you know, I think you'll just need to go to this to be able to answer additional questions. So let's say you have a group A2. That, let's say it's a restaurant with 50 people. Well, what kind of occupancy is that? They might ask that. Keep in mind, too, educational group E occupancies, that is K through 12. That is not college. College is a B occupancy, so don't get duped by that. That does come up occasionally. Something else that comes up, high hazard group H. Keep in mind an H5 would be like a semiconductor plant. It's very specific. So just know these differences. H1 would be like gases that are explosive. H2 would be like dust that is explosive. H3 would be like liquids, you know, well, excuse, anyway, just go through this, take a look at it. Explosives, H1's explosives, that's right. Gases are H2, dusts are H3, H4 would be like, you know, different kind of chemicals. But H5 is going to be your semiconductor. Let's see, keep in mind too, there's some R occupancies and group I occupancies that overlap. It's very important to understand that these are based upon 5 persons. It depends on what kind of group I you're at. I3 is a prison, for instance. I2 is a hospital. So daycare facilities, but you can also have a daycare facilities and an R occupancy. So just keep in mind, look up both, and then just take a look at the numbers they have. Because the numbers like 5 or fewer, that's going to delineate if it's an I or an R. Yeah, for instance, take a look. Here's an R3, care facilities for 5 or fewer persons, as an example. Storage occupancy, something that always gets me in storage occupancies would be like a, you could actually have, parking garages can be an S2 or a U. It depends on what size it is. Anyway, always read the definitions, otherwise you'll get caught up on it. This is something else that comes up. Recreational fire. You're allowed to have a recreational fire. The area is 3 feet in diameter or less and 2 feet or less in height. Now, you're allowed to do that without special permits and stuff like that unless there's a fire ban. You go above that 3-foot diameter, then that's sometimes, that's what the local fire code official or fire marshal will get you with. Know the definition of the standpipe. Understand what a Class 1, Class 2, and Class 3 is. Yeah, these are just more hazmat definitions. So, okay, let's jump into Chapter 3. These are generals. So, it talks about asphalt kettles for like roofing. Just understand these two items: fire extinguisher and distances. You need to be away from items. Now, this just as a secret here, if you're ever interested in, if you are a fire marshal or fire inspector and you don't see something that's right, they don't give specific definitions for combustible loading, but if you see something crazy, just reference 304.1. This is more of a career builder, but it's the teeth that allows you to fight excessive combustibles. A lot of subjectivity to that. Just to give you numbers, for instance, 100,000 BTU per square foot. You'd have to do the calculations, but that's typically below 100,000 is typically considered a low hazard. So just give you a ballpark. That's Fire Protection Handbook information. So dumpsters, in terms of keeping them away from buildings and sizes, just kind of know that if they're suppressed, there's an exemption for it up against buildings. Recreational fires again, tells you what they are. Yeah, like barbecues and stuff, keep them 10 feet away from combustible construction. That'll come up. You can never have candles in a group 2 dormitory, so you can't have, group R2 would be like an apartment building, so dormitory specifically, you're not allowed to have candles. So just battery charging stuff, but now here's something interesting. They're very strict, very prescriptive in terms of no smoking signs. So you're going to be asked, where do you need no smoking signs? Like in chapter 57, when they talk about storage of flammable and combustible liquids, they'll say no smoking. Come to section 310 for what kind of sign you need. So there's some jumping back and forth you need to do. Abandoned vacant premises have specific outlines you need to follow. Here's something else. So your bollards, it gives you the definition from the bollards you need to do, 4 feet separation, not more than that, 3 feet above ground, etc. So they'll give you some definitions. 312 will come up, I guarantee. In fact, I was talking to one of my colleagues. He actually failed this question here, which is why I wrote it down. But he went in and he said, well, didn't know how to put bollards. So another section required bollards. Come to 312 to find out how they're installed. And this is where you're going to find the numbers for distances and things like that. So keep in mind here, fueled equipment, portable generators, portable cooking equipment shall not be stored or operated or repaired within a building. And then it gives you some allowances. Now here, keep in mind, item number 1, buildings or rooms constructed for such use. Well, how does that define it? You go to the IBC, it's not going to call that out, so there's some HJ discretion on that, suppression, things like that. So there's a lot of latitude on terms of the HJ as far as what this means. Indoor displays. Remember we talked in assembly occupancy, putting a vehicle in a mall. These are the things you have to step through to do that. You'll be asked in the exam on that. You need to know the battery's disconnected, a minimal amount of fuel, etc. Okay, so ceiling clearance. Keep in mind the 18 and 24-inch rule. 18 inches to suppressed sprinkler head deflectors, 24 inches if it's unsuppressed. That's where that comes into play. So just keep that in mind. I doubt they'll ever ask this. I'm just throwing it out there. Factory Mutual actually has a 3-foot offset for storage occupancies, just for your awareness. You're not going to use that for this, though. This is an issue, too. Let's say you're going to go through and inspect something. How do you interpret no combustible materials? Let's say you're dealing with a server room or a mechanical room. So what you need to keep in mind is, once again, HJ discretion, but technically no combustible material storage within mechanical rooms or electrical rooms. This is something that'll get you to your storage for understair areas. If you have an enclosed stairway, thou shalt not have any storage. There's actually a reference from Chapter 7 of the IBC that's a little bit clearer, but just keep in mind you have to have fire-rated construction and a separate door to enter in, or you cannot have any storage under there. So outside storage, this is a question right off the test, 20 feet in height. You can't go above 20 feet in height for outdoor combustible storage. This is another question. Let's see, automatically open. Yeah, you got to keep the trap doors in floors. So sometimes you'll have like an access to a basement or something. They have to be closed at all times except when in use. That's actually a question right off the exam. Let's see here. Yeah, another important topic, just know that. All right, emergency planning and preparation. Okay, so when do you need an approved fire and safety evacuation plan for Group A occupancies with an occupant load over 2,000 people? That's a question off the exam. Gives you a little bit of information about notifications, but let's just jump through this. Okay, so here's the delineator for Group B occupancies, business occupancies. Do you have 5 or more people in your structure and or 100 or more people above or below the level of exit discharge? In other words, 100 people in the basement, 100 people on the second floor, that kind of thing. That's the delineator of requiring a fire evacuation and safety plan. So you're going to go through, chapter 4 actually tells you when to do drills, when you need like maps posted. You've been to the hotels or casinos, they have exit egress paths you got to follow. This is what's going to tell this is where you're going to find out if you need that. So just remember section 403 or chapter 4 in general. It gives you special precautions for an I3 a prison. There's some allowances there. You handle things a little bit differently. I2 occupancy, same thing. So R1 would be a motel. So you have to have an approved fire safety and evacuation plan on a hotel, including evacuation diagrams. So just take a look at what I have here. Just go through some stuff. Just why you need some. So this fire safety, evacuation, and lockdown has to do with like, mass shooter type incidents, things like that. So emergency evacuation drills. Let's take a look at this. This is an important table. You'll probably be asked something. Let's give you an example. How often does a Group B occupancy, a business occupancy, need a fire evacuation drill? And it's annually. Now, the reality is a lot of Group B occupancies aren't going to do that, but the code requires it. So the inspector will have the chance to go in, say, hey, give me records of your fire evacuation drills. Just about guarantee they're not going to have it. Now, here's some interesting things. This is something I've noticed. So this is actually a question you could be asked on the test. Identify the person conducting the drill. So in the records you're keeping, and keep in mind, records are 5 years. You got to keep them for 5 years. But, the reality is, do you really do that? In any event, it's... they have some weird things like weather conditions when occupants were evacuated. I'm just pointing that out. It's kind of weird. I don't think you're going to be asked it on a test, but it's interesting. Let's see. Yeah, I was inspecting once at a DOE site, and what they did is they just had some guy going through and saying, hey, this is a fire alarm, this is a fire alarm. That's actually a violation. You actually have to use if you have a manual pull station, you have to use it. It's a requirement right there. So chapter 5, let's go ahead and look through this. This is things like, fire apparatus roads, stuff like that. Let's see here. So 20 feet's so 150 feet's a dead end length. So what it comes down to is you have to be able to hook up or access through let's define fire apparatus road. The fire apparatus road is a road that you can get a fire truck onto. The code says you have to be able to hit within 150 feet of all points around the perimeter of a building. That's what the requirement is. Now there's some minor allowances to get you past that, but that's basically what it is. And the width of the road can't be less than 20 feet. Now keep in mind, this is important. You go back to Appendix D, I believe it's D. It is 26 feet if there's a hydrant on that. So some municipalities adopt the appendices, Appendix B, C, D, that kind of thing. If you have to go to the appendices. Otherwise, it's 20 feet. But a lot of places require 26 feet. For the sake of the test, it's 20 feet. They will ask you this question. They will ask you how high. What's the vertical clearance for fire apparatus roads? It's 13 feet, 6 inches. They will ask you those for sure. Dead end, I mentioned 150 feet. That's going to be another question potentially on your test. How far can you go down a dead end without a turnaround? I think it's Appendix C. Is it Appendix C, Appendix D? One of those two appendices. You just look it up. I have it marked. But go through and know what the requirements are for turnarounds, things like that. Okay, stairway access to the roof. If you're 4 or more stories above grade, you need to have a stairway access to the roof. keep that in mind. Premises identification, something that's required by the code, tells you it needs to be 4 inches for the height, 1/2 inch stroke. They'll ask you this. They'll say, for premises signage, how big are the letters? They're 4 inches. So anything dealing with fire department showing up, it's in Chapter 5. This is what you're going to go to, Chapter 5. So basically highlight the stuff I've highlighted, you'll be fine. You're authorized to have a lockbox, for, like a school, for instance. And let's say if a school system has an automatic fire detection system, smoke detection system, the fire code the fire code official can authorize and require a lockbox there. And that way, if the fire department shows up, they have a key to get in and check it out. So schools are notorious for that. A lot of times they're going to have those lock boxes. That's a fire code official will require that. So if you go back to Appendix B, Appendix B is what's going to basically your fire flow. That's where the requirements are going to be for that. They're going to have that outlaid there for how much water you need. So it says approved water supply, but they're all going to go to Appendix B, guarantee it. All your municipalities will look there. Okay, so a portion of a facility, where do you have to have a fire hydrant at? If you're more than 400 feet away from like a big group B occupancy, that kind of thing, the fire code official can come in and require that unless it is suppressed. And then particularly if it's a certain occupancy type, like if it's a group R3, like a house, or a group U, you can go to 600 feet. That's unsuppressed. Suppressed, I believe suppressed is 600 feet. I'd have to look through this, but in any event, just know this. Yeah, there it is. So for buildings equipped throughout with an approved automatic sprinkler system, it's 600 feet. So if you're, let's say, 605 feet away from the corner of a building to a fire hydrant, the fire code official, at least during the plans review, could require you to put one in. Okay, now look at this. This is a test question. How much clear space is required around a hydrant? It's 3 feet. Now, does that mean you can't park in front of it? If you have 3 feet around a hydrant, technically you could park in front of a hydrant. Now, most municipalities aren't going to allow that, but the code doesn't say you can't do it. As long as there's a 3-foot path or area around it, and that the fire department can access it. If they can go around the car, great, that kind of thing. Fire command centers, things like high rises require a fire command center, but they have specific sizes. So this is actually a question right from the test. You cannot be less than 200 square feet for a fire command center. So this is actually one of those questions right from the test for that. Let's see. So just, highlight, these are things I've seen sporadically, just highlight those. Fire protection and utility equipment identification. Let me see. Approved matter. What does approved matter means? Fire code official. So if it's approved, it means the fire code official has ratified it. That's what approved means in every case. Yeah, this is kind of a tight issue. I don't think any municipality meets this requirement the way it's meant to do. Now, I will tell you, go to the 2018, this Chapter 5, this section 510 changed a little bit. It requires some additional stuff, but honestly, as long as you go through these quizzes, and let's say you're taking a 21 or a 24 test for the Fire Inspector 1, Fire Inspector 2, you'll just know that this is in Chapter 5, so you'll go to it. There's a few additions here in terms of how to test those annually in the 2018 and forward versions. So don't get caught up on, minor stuff. You'll have no problem passing. Chapter 6, let's go ahead and run through this. So a couple of big things from Chapter 6 is electrical and things like duct inspections in restaurants, stuff like that. Emergency and standby power generation. Know the difference between emergency and standby. Standby is within 60 minutes, and for a load transfer, an emergency is 10 seconds. They will ask you that. In other words, what's the difference? What is the how much time does it take for a standby system to activate? It's 60 seconds. That's the question they'll ask you. Here's another question. So stationary emergency standby generators, what's the code? Keep in mind you could always go to the references section in Chapter 80. So if you do have any issues, go to Chapter 80 for things like that, and you can find the stuff you need. Just go, they'll have like 4 items. They'll have like, I don't know, you just name it here, a DAL, DOC, and a CPC, SC. Just look up each one. It'll kind of make sense what they're asking, and you'll figure it out. That's how you do it. So, yeah, just take a look at this. 2-hour fire barriers are required for like emergency power generators in a high-rise, stuff like that. Electrical equipment. This is kind of interesting. These are the same things out of OSHA and also the NEC. It's just kind of magic numbers. So 36 inches clearance in front, 30 inches width in front of your electrical panel, or however wide the panel is. So if the panel's 42 inches wide, you need 42 inches clearance. If it's 24 inches wide, you need 30 inches clearance. That's what that means. So there's 30 inches of width, 36 inches of depth, has to be clear to 78 inches above the finished floor. Those are questions that will come up, guarantee it. Extension cords, not allowed. This is all, keep in mind, this is OSHA. If you're familiar with OSHA, it's the same thing. But you can't have permanent wiring for an extension cords. And then temporary wiring, 90 days for an extension cord is what you're typically going to use. So if you're over 90 days and you have an extension cord there, they're going to define that as permanent. Keep in mind, I didn't go in the definitions. I don't think it'll come up, but temporary is defined as 180 days. So this is one of the rare things where temporary is defined as 90 days in this case for some reason. Okay, so portable electric space heaters shall not be plugged into extension cords. They always have to be plugged right into the wall. Same thing with RPTs, relocatable power taps. They're going to nail you on that for inspections, guarantee it. Whatever municipality you have, they'll go around looking for RPTs. But the rule is, you know, it really isn't an issue with modern day RPTs or heavier extension cords on a principles basis. This is just teeth for enforcement. You know, if you have, 16 gauge wire going into your 1500 amp or watt portable heater, if you have a 12 gauge wire running 100 feet, it's not a big deal. But regardless, it's in the code. You got to do it. Okay, mechanical refrigeration. Let me just highlight the stuff I have. If you highlight the stuff, particularly if I have things underlined, just take a look at it. So this is the stuff you need to write in an elevator. That's on the test. Let's see. So this tells you what standard to use. And it tells you a few other definitions for elevators. Just look at that section, understand it. Stationary battery storage systems. Keep in mind ESS, battery storage systems. I think all that's been moved to Chapter 12 and 2021 and beyond. So don't get caught up on it. Questions are going to be the same. Just remember Chapter 12. That's what you got to do. Okay, commercial kitchen heads. This is an important section here. Keep in mind you have to inspect them on a certain periodicity. I don't remember questions ever coming up, but I think it'd be worthwhile to know that just in case. The highlighted sections I have seen. Okay, Chapter 7, Smoke and Fire Protection Features. So Chapter 7 of the IBC is huge. This is just a minor section that basically says you need to maintain it per, the IBC effectively. Right there, new buildings shall comply with the IBC. Okay, this is a test question here. Existing fusible link automatic door closing devices are permitted if the fusible link rating does not exceed 135 degrees. That came right off the test there. So keep that in mind. Okay, so let's jump over to Chapter 8. Important chapter. No ASTM E84. It's extremely common. You're going to see ASTM E84 all over. That is something you need to know for interior finish, for ceiling and wall finish. Just know what Class A, B, and C is. Class C was actually a test question. Let's see here. So you need to know this section. So here's the question. You have an unsprinklered Group B occupancy that, you're in a corridor. What's your interior finish? And the classification right there is B. So that's what you'd abide by. A lot of times, keep in mind, so I've highlighted these footnotes, so sometimes you can get away with something different. For instance, a B occupancy right here, in exit enclosures of buildings less than 3 stories in height of other than Group I3 Class B interior finish for non-sprinklered buildings and Class C for sprinklered buildings shall be permitted. So you're allowed to drop that down a notch depending on the stories. So just look at your footnotes before you go ahead and pick whichever one the table 803.3 specifies. Okay, just taking a look at some stuff. I mean, just highlight. Take a look at my highlights. Obviously it's so hard to go through the whole book, but just look at the stuff I've highlighted. It'll help you out a lot if you do that. Let's see here. Yeah, this is a test question. The permissible amount of non-combustible decorative material shall not be limited. So if it's non-combustible decorative, you can put as much as you want. They actually ask that question, so keep that in mind. Okay, fire protection systems. So keep in mind this is occupancy dependent. That's why, in the definitions, if you look at IBC Chapter 3, it's occupancy. If you look at IFC Chapter 2 under occupancy, that's where they have the occupancy definitions there. So it's a little bit different. If you're just in the IFC, look at Chapter 2 under occupancy types. Okay, let's see. So basically just maintain your inspections. Try to find some tests for you. Yeah, they're asking, this is actually test questions. Basically, your inspection, testing, and maintenance, what standard are you going to use is NFPA 25. That's what they're calling out. But they have lots of stuff here, but they're going to ask it about suppression system. It's very common. So 903 is automatic suppression. Here's a question here that came from it that I marked. So Group A3. So in A3, you're going to have, so keep in mind, let's just do this one more time. Let's go back. So I want you to see this and understand it. So if you go back to definitions and go to the occupancy section. So I got to flip over to occupancy. And then I go to A3 and I have this list of stuff. So libraries, courtrooms, let's say it's a courtroom. So let's say the question says a courtroom that has an occupant load of 301 people, or a fire area that has an occupant load of 300 or more people, does it require suppression? Well, what I do is I'd go over here, I'd see a courtyard, or excuse me, a courtroom. A3 is a courtroom. I come over here, I go to A3, automatic sprinklers shall be provided if it's over 301. And the answer would be yes, it has to be suppressed. That's how you derive that. So yeah, it just tells you Group N, like a mercantile, a JCPenney type thing. Just look up your occupancy when you're trying to figure this out. So that's what it comes down to. It's pretty straightforward. This stuff's, if you have a building 55 feet or higher, yeah, you need to have suppression, that kind of thing. So they give you some exempt locations. A lot of people use these, particularly item 2 and item 4. But yeah, just generally speaking, you're always going to have suppression if it requires it. Balconies and decks. Here's a question right here. Sprinklers that are used to protect such areas shall be permitted to be located such that their deflectors are within 1 inch to 6 inches below the structural members. They're actually going to ask you that. Okay, here's another question. Sprinkler system supervisions and alarms. Exceptions. Valves controlling the water supply, critical air pressure, water flow shall be electrically supervised. Okay. Now you're allowed to do something different here. These are the exceptions. Control valves to commercial kitchen hoods, paint spray booths, or dip tanks that are sealed or locked in the open position. So that's actually a question right off the test. So is this one. So let's see, 904, alternative automatic fire extinguisher systems. Let's see, so shall not be considered alternatives for the purpose of... Okay, well, keep in mind, this is interesting. So let's say you had a book museum. This is a question. I'm trying to create the question you're going to see. And they want it on a second floor of an assembly occupancy. Are you allowed, like an A3, okay, an A3 occupancy, are you allowed, if you don't put automatic suppression in there, are you allowed to have the allowance? You're technically not allowed to have a second floor A3. Okay, depending on, there's some caveats there, and the reality is you're not, and they're going to ask, well, I'm using halofluorocarbon type stuff instead of, an NFPA 13 compliant system. The answer is no, you're not allowed to do that because it says you cannot take, you shall not consider alternatives for the purpose of exemptions or reductions allowed for automatic sprinkler systems by using an alternative system. Like some other ones are the Victaulic system that pumps nitrogen and water. Technically, it's not viewed as the same, let's say. There you go. This is a question. Just take a look at that. This asks you wet chemical alternative systems. What's the NFPA standard? It's 17A. Yeah, it tells you how to test your hoses. That's a question off the test, 2,500 pounds. Manual system. So this is for if you have a commercial cooking system. So this is how it's defined. Are there any grease-laden vapors? Period. That's what defines it. If you are making, if you have a George Foreman grill and you are selling hamburgers, your FCO, fire code official, will deem that as requiring a hood, a hood to capture that and process it. If it's not for money, if it's some employees just doing it on their own, technically it falls in the category of residential requirements. But you need to have a actuation device for your automatic system in your hood within 10 feet and not more than 20 feet away from the hood. So that's actually a test question right there. Okay, portable fire extinguishers. Class K has to be within 30 feet. Class K, know that it's a Class K within 30 feet. Yep, so your hood has to have a fusible link as well as a manual pull station. Standpipe systems. So they have 3 different styles of standpipes. You're going to need to know those. They're in the definitions. 30 feet is the magic number for standpipes. Right here, when the floor level of above the lowest level of the fire department vehicle access is 30 feet or more, you have to have at least a Class 3. So, and then give some exceptions there. Stages, 1,000 square feet. That come right out of the test. 1,000 square feet, Class 3. Interior exit stairway, needs them. So just basically highlight what I've highlighted. You'll be in a good spot. Be able to do well. Know that NFPA 10 governs portable fire extinguishers. They'll ask that. Okay, this is an interesting table. This will throw you. I think I do have some test questions on this. I don't want to go through it because it's complicated, but it's not quite the way it seems because it's based on area. And each A, keep in mind, each A corresponds to the area. So, but anyway, go through the problem I have on that. You'll understand that it's not what it seems. Let's see, grease fire. What did we hear? Fire extinguishers provided. Yeah, anyway, I have the reference there. Just look at it. I don't have time to go through everything. Okay. So here's a question here on Group A, manual fire alarm systems and assembly occupancies. It'll give you a few odds and ends. So 907 is, keep in mind, 907, there's two different kinds. This will throw you. Manual, automatic. What's the difference? A manual is where they have the manual pull station within 5 feet of all the doors. And automatic means you have automatic smoke detectors all tied into a central fire alarm system. So they're completely different, but for instance, a Group A needs a manual fire alarm system where the occupant load is greater than 300 or more, excuse me. And you have an allowance here if it's suppressed, but you get the gist. Group B occupancy manual. You don't need a manual if you're under 500 people. A lot of people think it's required. In fact, I didn't go back, but Group Bs don't even need suppression, period. So in Section 903. But 907 covers your fire alarms. So in some cases, you're actually required to have an automatic. So let's look at Group H here, or Group F. Let's see, manual for Group F. Group H, an automatic smoke detection shall be installed for highly toxic gases. Okay? So you have to have a manual in a Group H no matter what, but if you're dealing with highly toxic gases, thou shalt have a automatic. So, and then you go to NFPA 72, it defines what an automatic is. It gives you the parameters for it. That's something you'll need to know. I think I didn't see the reference, but you'll need to know that NFPA 72 corresponds with Section 907, NFPA 13 corresponds with Section 903. It'll be asked, stuff like that's kind of generic though. You can always look that up in Chapter 80 of this document. So once again, just, R2 would be an apartment building. A certain number of units requires it. Blah, blah, blah. You get the gist. Just go ahead and just highlight what I've highlighted. We don't need to go through it all. This does come up. This actually comes up quite a bit right out of it. So you look at, they're not going to go into this level of detail, but in Annex B of NFPA 72, it has estimated sound levels for different occupancy types. Like a typical Group B occupancy, I think it's about 50 to 60 decibels. So what this says, if you're in that kind of an environment, I would expect you to have, let's say 75 decibels as a minimum for your fire alarm notification appliances. But a lot of times you'll go in advance of the design with like a sound meter. If you're in a factory industrial environment with machinery running, just measure the highest sound level and go 5 above that. These are minimums. The maximum's 110. You can't go over 110 decibels. But these will be asked right there. Those are going to be asked for sure on your test. It's very, very common to ask that. Yeah, these are visible like strobes. So just you're going to need to know this. I have a couple questions on the prep exam for it. I think maybe I don't. I may not. I may not have focused on residential type stuff. But keep in mind that for this, you need to have, so sleeping accommodations, you don't let's say you have 60 different sleeping units in R2, in R1, a motel. 7 of those have to have visible alarms for deaf people. So they have to be, some of them, same thing with what's called A117.1, that's for ADA compliance, in harmony with Chapter 11 of the IBC for accessibility. They require so many of your buildings to meet ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, accessible. So this is a piece of that. So power supply, and there's NFPA 72 right there. That's what you're sizing it to. A zone. This, just read this. I don't have time. What this is telling you is, yeah, just read that. That's actually a question right off the test. Acceptance tests, records of completion per NFPA 72. They actually have forms to fill out. You don't need to know that, just per NFPA 72. Let's see, duration of operation for smoke control system. So this would be things like atriums, some exit enclosures, they're going to need smoke control systems. So this is right off the test, 20 minutes or 1.5 times the calculated egress time. So an engineer is going to calculate this. You need to make sure that their system is set up for the smoke controls to work that long, whichever is greater. 20 minutes or 1 point. Typically egress times, for buildings are about 3 minutes, but that's into an exit enclosure. Once you're like the World Trade Center, you could be in the exit stairway for 2 hours. In that case, they were in there too long. But to get to the exit stairway enclosure is usually about 3 minutes. So if you're in an atrium or something like that, 3 minutes is a general thumb rule. So, but obviously stairways are going to be longer than that, depending on how many stories you have to go down. Exhaust method were approved by the FCO, Fire Code Official. Okay. This gives you more little parameters. I didn't see anything there. Let's see. So this is smoke and heat removal, explosion control. Here's a question here. Fire department connections, clear width 36 inches, 36 inches, 78 inches. So there's a lot of times I'll put a ladder up next to an FDC, fire department connection. That's the things on the side of the wall that hook up to your sprinkler riser. But you need to keep it, this is a test question. Keep the area around the FDC clear by 36 inches in width, 36 inches in depth, 78 inches high. Absolute requirement. Here's another thing from the fire pumps. What standard are you going to install it per? It's NFPA 20. Temperature of the pump room. This is from NFPA 13. Cannot, you have to keep it 40 degrees Fahrenheit or higher. It says above 40 degrees here, but you can't let it drop below 40 degrees. And there's some allowances in NFPA 30 that could get you lower, but the reality is stick with 40 degrees for your question on your test. That's what it's going to be. Water supply for 30 seconds. Keep in mind, it's Appendix B is typically what they're going to use, even if they don't ask questions on the ICC test. But 30 minutes water supply.